All right, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Today we will talk about how to consolidate your maintenance tools, all within the context of Infor EAM. We talked about a computerized maintenance management system, or CMMS. Infor EAM, it's really way more than that. It's truly an enterprise solution for asset management. So let me introduce myself. My name is Angel Torres. I am the principal in our EAM practice within Visual K, and today I'll be conducting this webinar. All right, so as far as you'll see a couple of names here in this presentation. You'll see Infor, the company, you'll see Infor EAM, the software, and you'll see Visual K, the channel partner. So let me start by introducing Infor, which right now is the third largest enterprise vendor in the planet. I think what's most impressive about Infor, other than the quality and the portfolio of solutions that Infor has developed and continues to develop, is the amount of customers globally that Infor has. So we are cutting across many countries, continents, industries. Within those industries, there are industry verticals that we address. So in terms of breadth and depth of the solutions, they're really backed up by all of that experience. And of course, some of these solutions, including EAM, have been around for a very, very long time, and it shows. Okay. Now, as far as Infor EAM, the software goes, right? What we'll do today is that we are going to address basically our main topic today is that consolidation is possible. Many of you may or can have multiple systems to cover different needs within your industry, within your company. And basically, if you look at your typical CMMS, what you'll see is that obviously it's going to cover work management and asset management. But then once you start digging a little bit deeper, that's when you start you have these gaps which you need to fill with other solutions, and you start basically creating these environments where you have to go into your CMMS to do your work orders. You have to go into your niche player for calibrations. You have to put audit trails and electronic signatures on top of either the CMMS or the calibrations module in order for you to comply typically in regulated industries. So our thesis today is that we can consolidate. In fact, it's not theory anymore. We've done it many times over, and I'll show you. We're going to go into the software itself, and I'm going to show you. As far as Infor EAM, the software, right now it has been recognized as a global leader according to Gartner's latest survey, which was published in November of 2017. So we are in what they call the magic quadrant, which is that area in this graph. We're looking at the ability to execute, which in Gartner's terms means how happy customers are, how successful the implementation is, and in our specific case, Visual K being a channel partner, we have a lot of success when it comes to implementing EAM. Been doing so for the last 10 years. The other is that completeness of vision, right? As to how complete the software is, how integrated that software is. And EAM is really a true leader when it comes to vision, when it comes to developing and keeping cutting edge technology, and also addressing the basic needs, right? So it's important for you to understand and realize that EAM is a world-class solution. It's also meant to, we can start small and then we can grow from there. So it's not a tool for the next 2 years or the next 5 years or the next 10 years. It's really a tool for the long term. As far as customers go, like I said before, we have customers in many countries and then many industries, right? So if we look at manufacturing, you'll see some big names there. We look into oil and gas. We look into distribution. We look into life sciences. Some of these are heavy regulated industries, and EAM is really an option. Then again, looking at healthcare, looking at hospitality, looking at public sector. Obviously, for example, when you're dealing with public sector, you're looking at things like facilities, or you're looking at fleet management. When you're looking across healthcare, you're looking at medical devices, which are heavily dependent upon calibrations, calibrations being done by qualified personnel, calibrations being done at the right time, in the right intervals, and obviously being able to keep tabs on all of these pieces of equipment. So if we look at Infor EAM as an enterprise solution, it's really comprised of modules, and obviously at the heart of everything we do, we have assets, right, of different types. So EAM is not meant for only one type of asset, but rather facilities, capital equipment, like I said, vehicles, fleet, heavy machinery, all kinds of assets, right? Then obviously you have to look at the business processes behind and what EAM can bring. So we look at being able to either look at your internal resources for labor to conduct and execute on those work orders, or some of it might be subcontracted to a third party. So there's the option of you creating those work orders and then bringing outsiders to deal with the work. We also have a very robust materials management solution, so we can set up warehouses, inventory, bins, cycle counts, physical counts, all of the good things that go along with it. But the main reason for you to have parts, for you to have spares and keep inventory, is so that when the time comes, either to repair or to do a preventive maintenance of some sort, is so that you can execute with the confidence and you can plan with confidence that the right spares will be there for you. And obviously, it's very tightly integrated with our procurement process. So obviously, those parts need to come from somewhere. So we can create those purchase orders that will go to your suppliers. They will deliver to you. You will receive them into inventory. You can even post an invoice and do a three-way match. Obviously, EAM is not a financial system, so we're not going to cut a check, but we have a lot of experience integrating EAM to some of the ERPs out there in order to facilitate the information flow between inventory transactions, between purchase orders, and your financials. Scheduling, obviously, it's a big component when it comes to executing on your work orders. Another component which is important, and we've seen it time and again, it's everything related to safety, things like permit to work. And then most of our customers started out having a separate system where they would have their permits and control their permits and issue their permits. Nowadays, we're migrating more and more of them into EAM, so everything is linked, and you'll see some of that, right? So as far as maintenance goes, we look at reactive, we look at preventive, we look at condition-based, either by taking information from sensors, from PLCs, from control systems out there, also by means of doing checklists and inspections, right? So for some of your assets, typically those that do not move, typically a checklist or an inspection is the way to go in order to capture the actual condition of that asset. We also have some predictive tools inside of the software, so that based on your failure history, then we can using mathematical models, then we can predict when these assets may fail. So that's also in there. As far as sustainability goes, we also have means of tracking energy usage, water usage, how that relates to your maintenance, right? As time goes by and the performance on the asset will degrade, obviously it's going to consume more of these resources. So also, if you look at the consumption, it will also tell you a story. So that's important, right? Now, like I said, we are witness to being able to consolidate the different tools that you may have, right? So other than work management, other than asset management, and that's where a lot of CMMSs out there fall short, is the ability to incorporate things like audit trails, electronic signatures, revision control, calibrations, and also safety. So let's jump into the tool, and let me take you around for a spin. So this is CAM. It's a web-based tool, meaning it runs on a browser. You can host it within your environment, or we can host it for you on a service as a software as a service, aka cloud deployment. And here's an interesting fact, right? For the last probably 30 years or so, CMMSs have been around. Like in the first generation, we had our client server technology, where you would have a centralized server with the application and the database, and then you would have client computers that would have software installed in them, and then they would connect to that centralized server. Come 2000, then we had these web-based tools, which could be accessed from any computer out there via a web browser. But as of probably 2012, mobility in the form of smartphones, tablets, it has become like the industry norm. And if we look at, the maintenance people, they're seldom sitting in an office typing information into a computer, but rather they're either on the field or on the floor executing work. And that's really where mobility comes very handy, in the sense that you capture information when it happens and where it happened, right? Rather than to depend on paper. So as far as the tool goes, this is called the Start Center. So every time a user logs into the tool, this is a screen that they'll see. The intent here is to bring information forward, so that when people log in, they'll have these indicators here kind of telling them where they need to go, what they need to do. So for example, if I'm a planner and I come in the morning, one of the things that I'll probably need to look at is what requests came from the floor or from the field. So once I log in into EAM, this is the kind of information that will be presented to me, so that I can act upon it. In this particular scenario, I'm going to review these work requests, evaluate them, perhaps do some kind of a triage, and then decide whether it's worthy and necessary to perform this work and turn this request into an actual work order, or for whatever reason, be it that it's something that's really not worth doing, or because it has been taken care of by another work order, and you may reject some of these work requests. As far as information goes, we're also bringing out these charts so that we can look at different things like how many open work orders do I have there, how many work orders by department, how many work orders which are mechanical or electrical. So that information is there. And then we have these graphical indicators, again, The idea is to bring forward this information in a graphical way so that you can identify what's important to you and obviously get that information up front. So let's take a look at how our assets are put together in the system. So I'm going to start looking at my system structure. Basically, by means of creating this hierarchy, we're looking at how all these assets come together into a production line. My production line, I can further break down into subsystems, and then those subsystems I can break down into individual assets, or I've created what's called a position, meaning kind of a placeholder. In this particular example, we need to have a pump in the system, but the actual pump itself, it's an asset, and the thing is that it can move around, right? So today I can have it in service within this production line. Tomorrow I may take it out, replace it by another pump with another serial number, and then that one pump that I took out, I can either scrap it or I can refurbish it and just leave it within my stock room. So when the next major overhaul comes around, I can replace it and reinstall it in another as part of another system. But the important thing here is that it will carry with it all of its history and all of the information as to where it has been, how much time it spent there, either as a function of dates or as a function of actual production hours, running hours, if we have that information available. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is and this is kind of getting into functions that are typically done outside of a CMMS. So what I'll do next is I'm going to look at calibrations, right? So let's take a look at for example, here I have a pressure gauge, right? So I have a definition of the pressure gauge, which department, which class. In this particular example, this pressure gauge is considered an instrument and it was classified as such. The other thing is that we also look at criticality, right? So we can gauge and give it different criticalities to the different assets. So it gives you a couple of things, but for example, one, and this is one we're very proud of, is the fact that we can take this criticality, we can look at the work order type, and then we can calculate using a matrix. We can calculate the actual priority on the work order, right? So priority can take many shapes and forms. We're trying to keep it objective, and we do calculate priority so that it doesn't depend on the criteria of one particular person, but it's rather the combination of factors which have been discussed and agreed to by the different parties involved in the day-to-day operations and maintenance. So now, as far as these assets go, I can bring in the calibration of it, right? So I can define whether this is an instrument or this is a loop. I can say, well, this is an instrument to which you apply a standard, right? So typically this would be the case for single instruments. If we were looking at a loop, you will see that you could have several instruments, and then you would probably apply the standard to the first one and then make a reading out of the last one or something like that, right? We're looking at, in this particular case, we're looking at inches water column as my unit of measure for my points. I can look at the device tolerance. The other thing is that I can define what we call alert tolerance, which is the capability to identify, even within the standard operating range, at which point I want to start tracking because my device, my instrument could be drifting. So in this particular example, what we're saying is that within my normal operating range, anything that falls outside 50% within that operating range, I'm going to flag. And you'll see an example later. Obviously, the precision, if there is a PNID, a process and instrumentation diagram, where this asset can be located, which one is it, right? And then I define my test points, right? So what we'll do here is we're saying, basically, in this particular example, we're saying this would be my test point, so this would be my input, which would be inches water column, and then this will be my output. So I'm going to get an electrical signal, and I'm going to look at the voltage on that signal, and that will define my in and outs as far, and then obviously the number of test points that I need to do during my calibration. So for this particular example, we're doing just 3. Now, typically, something like this would be defined outside of EAM. So, for example, here we're consolidating all of this. So, in terms of my PMs, my preventive maintenance schedule for this particular instrument, what we're doing is that we are doing a calibration procedure once a year, right? So that becomes my schedule for my preventive maintenance. I have defined the parameters for my calibration. I've defined my test points, and now with my PM schedule, this is going to generate a work order, which looks like any other work order inside of EAM, even though this is a calibration work order. So let's take a look at what that work order looks like, right? So, and sorry, let me find the particular work order that I wanted to show you. All right, so here's a list of my work orders. Now, a couple of things worth mentioning here. Remember how I mentioned criticality as far as the record goes, and how we were calculating the priority based on that and some other elements? Well, it comes to show here, right? And everything here is being sorted out by means of a higher priority of urgent, priority 1s, priority 2s, and 3s, right? So there are some visual cues as to what should be done first and what should be done second. But let's go and just take a look at my calibration work order, right? So again, this work order looks like any other. It obviously identifies the piece of equipment that I'm working with, but when it comes to the calibration, right, this is where my test points come to be, right? So I'm applying minus 25, and I should be getting a reading of 0. So in this particular point, the calibration has passed, right, for this particular point. Now, when I look at, let's say, the last point here, and I say, well, I'm applying 0.25 inches water column, I should get a reading somewhere between 9 and 11. So I'm going to say I've got a 12. Now, when that happens, my calibration status has failed, right? So I can do my adjustments, and I can record here, obviously, my as found, and then I can report my as left, right? So the whole calibration procedure is recorded here. Then, for example, let's say that I do a 9.75, right? So when I discussed my alert tolerance, this is really where it kicks in, right? So what I'm saying is it's within my normal operating range, but the device is drifting, right? So you can decide whether you can flag it and say, well, we want to recalibrate this instrument next month or next week, or I can leave it as is, but I have these flags set up. Now, so again, to recap, right? We have defined our assets with our test points, our calibration procedure. We've created a PM schedule that was really calling for a calibration. We generated a work order with the calibration. We're recording the results of that calibration. Now, the next thing is once I'm done here, right? And I say, well, this calibration was performed by, and here's where, for example, an electronic signature will kick in, right? So now I can say, well, I am this user, right? Here's my password, and then I can create different types of signatures. So if I want to put in place some kind of a revision process or different levels of approvals, this is where my electronic signature with the different signature types will kick in, right? So, and the thing is that this complies with CFR Part 11, and it has been tested and tried in the life sciences industry. So it's been proven and validated, right? So now we see how our calibration procedure, our electronic signatures are all coming together. Now, there's one more thing that I would like to present, and that has to do with my safety information, right? So let me just go here, right, and show you. Sorry, there's one more thing. When it comes to, let me just reset this. When it comes to all the activities that take place inside of my enterprise asset management or my CMMS, if we want to look at it that way, there's also the capability to pull up your audit trails, right? So, and this is something, for example, in this particular situation, it's just saying, well, on this particular date, at that particular time, this work order was created, that's the event, and who the user was, right? So from there, we can turn on and off, and this does not require any programming, but rather it's just configuration to turn on and off the audit trail, either on something like a work order or even in a field within the work order, right? So you can capture all of these different events and what the previous state and what the current state is by means of having the audit trail capability inside of EAM, right? So again, we have our assets, we have our calibrations, we have our electronic signatures, we have our audit trail, all within the same tool, right? So let's work our way through this other example. Now we're going to look at the safety component, the permit component of our work management solution, right? So here I have a particular asset. This one is a pump. And for this pump, we can define a couple of things. So first, for example, I can say, well, as far as safety goes, there's a risk of electrocution, which means that you have to take precaution and you have to wear rubber gloves. Now, what will happen is that as we define these safety things at the asset record, whenever a work order is created, rather than for you to do a job safety sheet and attach it to the work order, all of this was defined from the get-go. And these things, they are also revision controlled so that nobody can change them on the fly, and you will have an audit trail of which changes were made by whom and when. The second part is that I can also have a lockout, tagout process. So I can say, all right, so if you're going to deal with this pump, first thing that you have to do is obviously turn it off. Where do you do that? Well, you go to the motor control panel, number 001, you go and you open that breaker. Then you go to valve number 1, you close that valve, you go to valve number 2, and you close that valve. And with that, you have isolated this particular pump, and now, well, almost ready to work on it. The third component is a permit, right? So here we can define a permit, and a permit will have a body, it will have a format, right? So you can print that and have people sign off on it, but the thing is that it's all within the definition of the asset. So whenever a work order is created for that particular asset, you would have safety information, logout, tagout information, and then a permit information. Now, it all comes together at the work order level. So let me go and find that work order for you. So that would be, where is it? All right, so I'm looking at work order. No. All right, so this would be work order. There we go. All right, so here's what happens, right? So we have a work order. Somebody has to go and take this pump offline. But before they do that, they definitely have to have a permit. So when the work order was created, a permit was created along with it. So if I look at my permit, right, this is a separate entity, meaning a separate document from my work order that will have the controls in place, so that the issuing authority, the control authority, will take ownership of this permit. They would be the ones to basically approve this work order, take it through the different approval levels. It would also go through things like when exactly is it required, how much time it's required, if there are any extensions, how long can you extend it for, and then obviously it will carry with it the safety information, the lockout, tagout information. It all really comes together, coming off from the asset into the work order, and then creating that permit, and then obviously having all the controls in place, right? So basically, this is a short tour. Wanted to highlight how all these different things come together within EAM, and our proposal is simple. If you have something like EAM, and then you have other systems around that taking care of your permits, if you have other systems taking care of your calibrations, we think it's time for you to consider bringing everything under the same roof. If you don't have EAM yet, we also invite you to consider implementing EAM. And now that you know that you can also do calibrations and permits and all this good stuff, it's also a good time for you to consider moving into EAM. So I guess with that, I'm done for today. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you soon.